So if you go to the website, it's www.nadr, Network Applied Design Research.nl. You can see a little bit of the network, but you can also see some of the publications. And what we do is we have each year we have one specific theme. And what we have is meetings during the year that we will discuss this theme. People will contribute papers or chapters. They will get feedback. So it's a little bit like a conference, but it's like it takes a year. And then the result we try to wrap up in a publication, and then it's an open access publication. We do it through Taylor and Francis. And we found out that doing it through the scientific publisher adds about 1 year to the publication date. So the content of this book was ready a little bit less than a year ago, actually at the last Dutch Design Week, where we will be presenting it in 2 weeks. We discussed this subject, and now the book will be available from 22 October on. So you can download it for free, but you can also buy a paper version, but of course you have to pay to them. But it's open access and it's Creative Commons. So you can even print it yourself, I think, and that is allowed. So if you want to read more about NADR, go to the website, and then now we will zoom in on the specific subject of the living labs, where Anja is our genius expert. So she will do the discussion from now on. Perhaps Anja will even make advertisements for her other book on living labs. I'm not sure if they're in. But if you Google Anja Overdiek and Living Labs, you get some other publications. These are the 4 editors of this book. So it's Anja, who will introduce herself also. Wina Smeenk, who's professor at in Holland, University of Applied Sciences. And Koen van Turnhout, who's at Utrecht. So we're all over the Netherlands. Anja, take the floor, and you can introduce the publication.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Hello to everybody. My name is Anja Overdiek. I'm a professor of cyber-social design at Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, and also working as associate professor at The Hague University of Applied Sciences, where we've been engaging with living labs and other innovation environments for quite some years. So what I will do is to take a tour with you through the book, and give the floor to you actually at 2 moments in time, because I think that will be a little more interactive as opposed to only talking about this at the end. So why this subject? Why did we think and also experience by people working with labs and applied design research, this is an important topic to pick up? These experimental learning and innovation environments are spreading very much from the research field. Also, research funding often asks for labs now, and in the Netherlands we have a vivid discussion about what these different labs do and what they add to more systemic changes in society. So we thought it would really be a good moment to collect our different contributions from applied design research in Holland on this subject. And we actually had a lot of pieces coming in on our call, and selected 27 authors from that. First of all, I want to go a little bit into how we frame the phenomenon of local experimentation and labs. If you look at this slide and at this list of abbreviations, you already see that there is a lot of names for local experimentation. Also lab names like Transition Arena, which don't have the word lab in their name. So these are the names which appear most in case studies and in research during the last 5-6 years. We thought, is it now the moment to make another category of this, or shall we, from a designerly perspective, choose another way of looking at this field? And we chose another way. So we didn't make categories of all these labs and experimental environment, but we said more that they are a family, that they have a family resemblance. Some of you might know from Wittgenstein, from philosophy, you have this idea of that there are similarities between phenomena, but there is no one defining element which applies to all of the family. So that is the general idea we are applying to this field to allow us to look at it more in a more dynamic way. So if you look at the figure here, we see that there are differences in the focus of labs. Are they more technology focused or more focused on social innovation? And of course, we always talk about socio-technical innovation, but if you look at the activities in the lab, they are often more technology focused or more focused to social innovation. And on the other axis, there are a lot of differences in the level of co-creation and how many stakeholders are involved in the labs and at what level they are involved. Are they just testing solutions, or are they really co-creating from the beginning? Do they have a decision power? So this is the field we see. Next to that, we also see that there is still a lot of confusion about innovation and transition in labs, that this is really something we are still in this field lacking the language for. So how, of course, in science, we know what the difference between innovation and transition is. But in the practice of these labs, it is often not clear how they relate to innovation or transition, if they even relate to transition, to society transition, and how they do that. So in this table, we show what different activities or principles really you could apply to labs which are more focused, more aimed at innovation as opposed to transition. And of course, that's also more a continuum than an excluding definition. So what is it? How does this thinking about labs we're introducing here, about living labs and other experimental environments, help to work more dynamically with labs and to look at them in a more dynamic way? You would have this figure where you could settle your own or position your own lab initiative in this field, and also be transparent about things. So it's level of innovation, level of co-creation, and innovation versus transition. And you could also, that's what is shown on the right side. You could also even look at one transition challenge. We have worked it out for the case of bio-based production here, where you would look at different labs to help you to bring to make progress in designing for this transition challenge, where you would maybe first work with labs to work out innovative materials, but then you would work with labs which have more social exposure to change whole markets and environments, maybe to make this really a systems shifting change. So I think that is our thinking summarized about labs we present in this book. And before going deeper into the other contributions. I would like to give the floor to you now, to your questions. If there's anybody who has questions about this or remarks, you are invited to speak up now. We see anything in the chat, maybe? Anybody?
I see a question about the downloadable ability of the book, which is more a meta question. Yes, it will be downloadable, but after 22 October. So when it's silent, it's always a little bit of a question, like if it's like super easy and recognizable what we discuss, or it's like totally over your head and you're like lost. So, Katerina, I see your camera is on, but I'm not sure if you wanted to ask a question or not.
I was just wanting to ask a question, and it's related to like the implementation or the building up a living system lab. I have a farm driving by regenerative agriculture, and I'm also an architect. And I have the intention to build up a lab, and there is so many things about these labs and system living labs, and you could get a bit lost. So if there is some kind of how could you start creating a system living lab?
Okay. So like a manual, yes?
Yeah, or,
Yes.
or not manual, not just, I know it's not
Yeah.
recipes
Okay.
often,
Yeah,
but
this publication is certainly not a manual. It's more a collection of insights and experiences. However, there are quite, I think, some manuals available. I think, Anja, your books, are they more manual-like? I'm not 100% sure.
Books Innovating with Labs from the Hague University of Applied Sciences are much more hands-on, but they are also quite broad in the sense that all kinds of labs could use these steps to develop themselves. I think you also find a lot of tools with European Network of Living Labs, ENOL. So step-by-step advice how to develop a lab. And I also recommend always the publications of Sivkovic for more systemic design labs and elements you should not forget about.
Oh wow, thanks a lot. If you could just please write the names, because I don't really,
No, and
it'd be really helpful. Thanks a lot.
I'm currently working with the AMS Institute. It's in Amsterdam. They do a lot of urban living labs. And also there, what we found is that there's a lot of experiences, but you have two kind of people. You have the practical people, the theoretical people. And the practical people do it, but they don't write about it. And the theoretical people write about it, but they don't really do it. And there's like so what we try to do is to collect the experiences from the practitioners and to write it down so other sort of practitioners can apply it. But that will be available like in end of the year. So that's not useful at the moment yet, but it is a little bit of a gap because you have people doing it and people writing, and it's like not always the same. Michelle, I see a hand.
Thanks.
Hi, let me just get my hand down. I'm on my phone, so moving this is a little tricky. Okay, so a bit of context. I am a designer of sorts. Sort of followed the bouncing ball. I've got a PhD now in transition design. But I am a research scientist at CSIRO in Australia, which is a classic science organization. I'm quite fascinated by this idea that you would have multiple living labs, multiple labs operating for different purposes, and that you can sort of form a value chain or an ecosystem maybe of living labs where you might have sort of handoff of value or contribution of value that could then lead to use in another context, that could then lead to other use. And I'm guessing that the example that you showed in your last slide on the bottom right was a was something that you sort of observed happen and drew out that pattern. But I'm just wondering if you've seen examples of creating ecosystems or value chains of labs, because I think that seems like a really interesting way to give them a bit more longevity and help. You can't always have all your stakeholders of a system in one space, and some of them don't always go well working with others. So you might have like policy sections, and in agriculture you might have agricultural field labs, and then while the policy lab is going, while the community practice lab is going, like, so you might have sort of different things. I'm just curious if you could extrapolate more on that concept.
Yeah, perhaps two examples, like I mentioned Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, there are quite some different living labs, but they're all in the municipality of the same city. But there is like one is, for instance, in the southeast area and it's focused on garbage, and the other is in the north and it's focused on energy. And there's one in, let's say, the Bijlmer, which is focused on transport. So so this could be that they're in the same region, but very different topics. But I think Anja has an example of retail where they have retail labs and they are all the same subject, but they're in different parts of the country. So they have different cities where they have retail labs. And one is in Leeuwarden and one is in Amsterdam and one is in Maastricht, and they try to kind of share experiences. So these ecosystems exist, but also organizing the mutual knowledge exchange between the labs is often, well, as nature says, if you don't put energy in something, everything falls in different parts. So organizing networks takes time, but there is knowledge sharing. Anja, perhaps you can explain how you did that in the retail network.
Yes, thanks for the question. I think this is very relevant and really a developing area at the moment. We already talk of platforms which align and communicate the different learning of labs in one transition challenge to each other. So one example of such a platform would be what is happening in the Netherlands in the so-called embassies of the Dutch Design Foundation. So they work together with a lot of designers and transition managers and researchers on bio-based building or on responsible digital innovation or on a new food system. But they would recollect every year what has been learned in the labs and see how they can how you can learn from each other. But this is really like this hub of labs, this platform which is very much developing at the moment in different forms in different countries, I would say.
Okay, perhaps it's time to move on to the next part of the meeting, because we have 1 hour, I think, maximum.
Yeah.
So Anja,
I think you can still see my screen.
yes.
This is the overview of the book. So it has 3 parts, and if you look from the outside to the inside in this figure, the first part with different chapters really is zooming out. How does a lab relate to the social environment and to shifting systems, really, and how can we organize that? The part 2 is more about the social dynamics in one lab and how designerly research and innovations can help with that. And the third part is really about the materiality designerly artifacts create in labs to discuss and have a dialogue about systemic and complex questions. And we have 2 examples of chapters now from these 3 parts. And the first one is from Peter Joore. So I will give back the word
Yes.
to you, Peter, to
Yes,
explain this.
Okay, it's a chapter about festival experimentations, and actually what the theory behind it, or the philosophy, is that festivals, and of course all living labs have it, is like a bounded area where you can create a sort of mini society. But the advantage of a festival is that you have to build up everything from scratch, like the food system, the water, the waste, energy, even the payment. We did this, or we did it. It's not we did it. It's a festival in the north. It's called Welcome to the Village. And village, is of course village, but in Dutch it means a dorp. It's the Dutch word. And it's a festival of like a little bit less than a week. And at the festival, we developed innovations and tested them with the participants of the festival. So partly co-creation, partly testing. But the interesting part was that this festival was organized several years in a row. And each year we did this, we organized this dorp, this innovation event where students and other practitioners worked together and worked on specific innovations. And what we tried to analyze in the paper, in the chapter, is because the ambition is that you can innovate on a societal level, let's call it transitions, because you can build up your whole society from scratch in a week, because you have to build the water system, you have to build the energy system, you even can create a new currency during the festival. And so the idea is that you create a mini society so you can innovate on societal level. So not only a product or only a service, but linked together. And what we try to analyze is if certain innovations, how they moved during the years of the festival, because some innovations have been tested like 2 or 3 times in a row, if they moved on the kind of systemic level. So if it stayed a very product, and what you saw, for instance, that people came in with a product ID, like an entrepreneur, and then during the testing, they kind of discovered that their challenge was not about the product, but it was about the service or the rules, for instance, they were part of. So, but a lot is happening more on the lower level, so let's call it the practical levels. And to really innovate in such a time on a societal level, what we found is that it's quite challenging. And you really have to consciously focus on it, because most entrepreneurs, they're really more focused on their specific innovation. So we wrote down, it's another book, it's called the Festival Experimentation Guide. So these are the kind of really guidelines and rules how to do it. I'll put the link in the chat. Just be sure that it is a safe site, but you get a warning that it's not safe, because I think it's like an old site. But here you can at least download the book. It's about, I don't know, 320 pages. So this one will be downloadable from next week, but the other one, it's already downloadable now. Okay, Anja.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So the second example of a chapter in the first section, in the first part of the book, is the work of researchers from the Hague University of Applied Sciences, who have looked into skills and capacities needed to work in labs as a designer, but also as a student. I saw the question in the chat about student involvement. I will get back to that. What is it? Are there other skills needed? What are the areas of skills needed? And what they came up with was a view on micro and macro skills, where the micro skills would be more focused or needed in one session you might facilitate with multi-stakeholders, and the macro skills would be more about the strategy and also playing with what is happening in the whole process you are facilitating, and to see how to communicate and how to steer and navigate across that process. So these are two chapters from the first part. Then we go to the second part. As I said, this is more about the social dynamics in a living lab. When you start a living lab, you get into this, you often get into the situation that you work with a lot of different stakeholders with very different professional languages, with different interests. This chapter by Wina, Smeenk and others, it is about how you might learn together, and they applied boundary crossing learning mechanisms, which you see in the topic column of this table. So identification, reflection, coordination, and transformation. And they applied that to 3 cases and really made tangible how this learning is happening in different labs, and how that also requires to sometimes open and sometimes close the lab. I think also a remark of one of you related to this already, that you cannot be always open. You sometimes need to create also a closed space to discuss and live through deeper transformations with this group you're working with in a co-design process in a lab. So a very interesting chapter about learning in labs. Then the second example is Koen von Turnhout. He relates communities of practice, yet another concept, another way of collaborating to labs and or experimentation labs. And he also has this nice examples about how design facilitates communities of practice. So what you see in this left photo is actually lines of a song, and people would collect these cut pieces and make songs together. And that was one way in this particular lab they facilitated the collaboration across these different disciplinary groups, these different professional groups to work together and to decide together what transition challenge or what particular experimentation they wanted to do together. But he relates very much the phenomenon of communities of practice to living labs. So that was part 2 of the book. Then I go to part 3, which is about artifacts in labs. And the first example of a chapter I have here is Tivani van der Horst and others from Rotterdam University, who are building designed boundary objects. What you see here is an object which can be used by people who talk about artificial intelligence and how different stakeholders are involved in developing it. And this artifact makes power relations very tangible, because you can actually really put pawns, and they have a certain weight, and you also discuss what weight you give your pawns. And what she experiments with is how the discussion about AI changes when using this kind of artifact. But she's also looking into how scalable this is, because she noticed that after some time everybody wanted her to facilitate this artifact, but she was not able to do that physically always. So she also experimented with online facilitation of physical artifacts and the limits of that. So that's also about about the question, how much can we do online in a lab and how much needs really physical interaction. Second example is also Rotterdam of University of Applied Science work of Thomas Jaskiewicz, who works with civic prototyping labs, so labs which use technology, little robots in the city and allow people to co-design them for their own purposes. And what he does together with Iskander Smith, his co-author in this chapter, is to analyze how this prototypes, which were produced by citizens in these different lab iterations, how they how you can read implicit knowledge from them and how you can collectively design with them. So use these artifacts to really empower co-design in these urban living labs. I think these were our examples. There's much more in the book. So again, I would invite some of your questions.
Okay, let's see what happens in the chat. And I see I have some feedback about the festival guide. So I think John is doing organizing festivals as this. So I don't know if he wants to share a little bit about it or if he is busy with his grandchildren.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I actually wanted to go on a slight tangent. I haven't read your book about festivals yet, but I'm very curious about whether you've looked at the relationship of labs, living labs that have been set up, so to speak, from scratch, and their relationship to existing institutions, for example, local libraries or post offices or colleges or all the different places that exist, because I think there's a slight tendency to imagine if you haven't set it up from scratch, it's not interesting. Whereas I've seen some very fascinating, some examples where people have put lab-like activities into a local library, for example. Has that been part of your investigation?
No, I totally agree with you that often people always like to create something, and it's often even related to funding. So they have funding to start something, and then when the funding stops, everything stops. I think it's a lot to do with ownership, like who says it is a lab. So just to come back to Amsterdam again, there is some people in the municipality or in the AMS Institute or in the university that decide, let's make this area in the city a lab. So it's an existing area. However, the people that live there and work there don't know that they are suddenly a lab now. And then people go to their door and then they say, please, can you join us for this co-creation workshop because you are a lab? And they're like, I didn't know I was a lab. I just live here. And then they come sometimes and they're enthusiastic. And then there's even a thing that's called participation tiredness, because they've been invited for 10 workshops. And then they are a little bit like, when do you do something with all my suggestions? But I don't know of a publication about this, but I think it's really great to use existing areas, specifically libraries, because libraries are looking for new meaning these days. And reading books is not perhaps what they should be about. It's about connecting people and sharing experience. So I'm curious to know what you've done. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but...
Well, I just think I'm not aware of publication either. I think it has potential. The one thing I could mention is I went to a place in New York called the Good Work Institute, which was basically a fellowship program for people running things like libraries or community colleges or bakeries who had a social function and a kind of experimental function, but didn't have that name, as you just said. So I just think there's an enormous amount of potential in putting activities into, they already have a building, they have staff, sometimes they have money, maybe they have a cafe.
Sure.
So you can put
Yes.
activities into the infrastructure which already exists. So was curious if you'd had that discussion.
The discussion is certainly there, and I think it is really valuable to use these areas, because one of the things often is that what I said, the start and end, whereas you don't want to start and end, you want a continuous development. But I'm not sure if it's been coined by somebody in a way. So that could be an opportunity to write a book about it, but or to share experiences. At least I know in Holland that the libraries are rather active to reinvent themselves.
Also, local museums. Yeah, everybody
That's
is
the same.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the same. True.
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe I
Victor, I see
can.
a question from
Yeah,
Victor. I'm not sure. It's a very
yeah,
long.
I saw that too. I saw
Can you
that too. Victor, are you still here?
Or he just left us with a difficult question
Yeah.
and ran out. Like, you solved
Yeah.
this, I'm gone.
Yeah, but I think it's a very interesting question. Of course, Victor said co-design, collaboration mean different things to different people. And are labs always facilitated by designers, or are they can be facilitated by community members? I think you're totally right, Victor. It means very different things to different people. That is why it is so important to be transparent about when you use a lab, what level of co-creation you are envisioning as a co-design group or as a citizen group. And that is not always the case, or often not the case, that there is even reflection about this and transparency. And that's why a lot of municipalities also in the Netherlands have been accused for lab washing, like using labs in the energy transition, for example, to mimic a participatory act where there was no co-creation from the beginning. So very important question, and that's why we also decided to keep this whole axis in our situating the family of the labs and experimentations. The level of co-creation and who you involve and how you involve people is important, and you can make different decisions about that, but it's important to be transparent about these decisions. Then this question, of course, citizens can also facilitate their own labs. What I see is that it is often depending on who is financing a lab, actually, what decisions about facilitation are made. We have a lot of labs in the Netherlands which are financed by government organizations, and they usually employ facilitators to facilitate the labs. There are also citizen labs, but usually they are very short-lived. There is a very restricted, for example, in Rotterdam, you have a subsidy of 10,000 euro to start a lab with other citizens who want to be involved in city planning or in sustainability questions. But usually the funding is very restricted. So most labs come from governments or from research institutions, because a lot of European fundings, for example, now specifically ask for the use of labs as a research methodology. And then the next question was the difference between lab activity and social experiment. Maybe you can, Victor, could you quickly explain to me what you would frame as a social experiment?
I think Victor can't
See.
hear me.
Yeah.
He's there.
No, I was just trying to. I was reading as you were talking. I went to the website and trying to understand what it means. But let's imagine. So let's use Peter's example of the Living Lab project that was multiple years of a festival in the Netherlands in the north or somewhere, I think.
Yep, correct.
There are festivals that I have been to that happen every year where people try different things and they learn. I don't think they would have called it a living lab. The language of the rhetoric isn't there. I don't know if it has to be some type of specific methodology, or can we apply that? Or maybe because it didn't have government and well, they did have some industry, citizens. Maybe they didn't have academia, so it doesn't count. I'm trying to get at, because I think experimentation happens all the time in real life, in the world, and in some cases, like festivals, year after year. So I'm trying to understand what makes it a living lab versus experiments that people do otherwise.
Sure. Where you come from? Where's your country? You mentioned the festivals.
Oh, I'm in the United States.
Yeah, because I think there's really a big difference between the European and the US perspective, because I noticed, I think we are very government focused here and we look often to the government to solve all our problems. And I noticed that I think a lot of it is perhaps already happening in the US without having a formal name, but people just finding each other and starting to experiment. But perhaps the scientific part is partly academia driven, so people writing about it and learning, and perhaps even partly funding driven, because if you use the right words and phrases and concepts. But it's often, I think the reason often things start is that there's a bigger challenge, let's call it a societal challenge, that cannot easily be solved by individual actors or by market economy. So there's this, like, just a simple example of sustainability. It doesn't solve itself by market economy or just individuals. So you need a sort of bigger, let's call it a director or a designer that designs perhaps a little bit on a higher level. And that is where this labs concept comes in, I think. But then there's of course the question of bottom up versus top down. How does change happen? Can you, in Dutch there's the word de maakbaarheid van de samenleving. It means the makeability of society. So of course the whole discussion, how makeable is society, or should society make itself? And that really has to do with your almost your worldview. I think if you're a real American, you should say it's bottom up, people should do it themselves and the government should stay out. But as Europeans, we expect everything from the government to solve all our problems. So that's why we pay a lot of tax, and then they should do the job. So, and then the government cannot do it alone. That's why they sometimes start these living labs to involve other stakeholders. But trying not to be too cynical. Anja, you introduced the idealistic part again.
Well, I would say, Victor, you're right. But they were living labs avant la lettre. So we didn't need this word to do experiments. But the concept has been developed very much with open innovation thinking, what Peter said before. So we need different stakeholders to really make bigger changes, to bring them together, and with user-centered design. So we need to design with who is going to use this solution or this next step in development in order for it to work. And I think that those are elements which are perspectives which are very important to the living lab concept. So it's a kind of development, I think.
Okay, thank you.
There was one more question about students in labs. I know in the Netherlands there is a lot of work about how to engage students, particularly also from the universities of applied sciences, who are figuring out how to, do that also on a broader level as opposed to only a few students. There's a lot of very positive examples as students, as the voices of the next generations are really need to be part of these experimentation processes.
And there's a short discussion about the concept of third spaces. Like there's actually in the book, there's one chapter which refers also a lot to the third space, so the lab as a sort of third space. I put in the Wikipedia. Apparently in France they're active in that way, but it's like a place, I think, in between. I'm not an expert in the theory, but it's like a place in between private and work, I think, where people meet and share experiences. So there is the chapter 9, I think, no, chapter 8 in the book, it mentions some of these ideas. So what do you think, Anja? Should we close off or have some final questions?
Yes, that's a great idea.
Okay, thanks for being here, and then enjoy the RSD conference.